Monty Neal. Monty Neal's next. Let me just say this. Monty Neal has been at the forefront of the struggles against high-stakes testing in Massachusetts. In fact, his organization, I believe there are two organizations that have been at the forefront of these struggles for a very long time. Rethinking Schools and Fair Test. Yes.
And our speaker issued a Arnold one that helped develop it. So maybe we should get a copy.
We'll distribute. Okay, so there is an opt-out guide for those interested. If you look at the flyer for today's event, my email is right on there. So if you're interested in the opt-out guide that's been created on the national level, please let me know, and I'll get that to you. Before I leave the mic, let me say this because I noticed some people are leaving. This is not a one-time event. We're looking to structure ongoing dialogues. Okay, April 23rd is another dialogue on education. Same time, same place, 5 to 8 on the school-to-prison pipeline. And of course, high-stakes testing will be the first step, right, in the school-to-prison pipeline because we're creating school systems that are highly unresponsive. April 24th, we have one of the leading voices against the corporate agenda in education. His name is Henry Giroux, who will be speaking at UMass in the Grand Reading Room at 5 o'clock. April 25th, I'm also screening the film, Standardized Lies, Money, and Civil Rights, one of the best films made thus far on the issue of high-stakes standardized testing. So that film will be screened at the organization right down the street called Third Eye Unlimited. Same time, 5 o'clock to 8 p.m. Okay, if you're interested. April 25th. Monty?
Thank you, everybody. I know we've been talking kind of at you for a long time, so I'll try not to go too long, and we can have some conversation here. My organization, Fair Test, we've been fighting against standardized testing for the better part of 30 years. I used to have more hair. And it's partly due to the fact that, unfortunately, we're not winning. We're winning, interestingly, on college admissions. We have a list of 800 colleges, more than 800, where test scores are optional for some or most applicants to the college. Many good colleges are test score optional. So we've been winning on that front. We have obviously not been winning on testing into public schools, which have simply massively inundated the schools. But as Alan pointed out, the evidence, even using test scores like NAEP, is that it's not working. It doesn't even work to boost test scores on independent tests, never mind anything else. And as Orestes said and others, if you talk with people in colleges, what they'll tell you is that more and more students come in, they don't know how to ask questions. They want a formula answer, so they've been trained on testing. Now, this winter, Fair Test and Save Our Schools and United Opt-Out, along with parents across America and the Network for Public Education, launched what we call Testing Resistance and Reform Spring. To go to resistthetest.org, you can link to the map we have. I can't say that as a website it's taken off, but as Orestes pointed out, the movement certainly took off. And it's really been clear that there's four issues of demands. One is to reduce the amount of testing. The second is to end high-stakes tests like the Massachusetts graduation requirement. The third is that we need to have multiple forms of performance-based assessment of children in schools. Now, that's kind of alternative, different approach to assessment is needed for several reasons. It's not simply to replace the standardized test. For being hit in the head with a baseball bat called standardized test, the solution is to stop being hit in the head, not to ask for a softer bat. I'm not saying that alternatives are a softer bat. Alternatives are a different way of thinking about teaching and learning. Alternatives are about returning power and authority to local communities, to parents, teachers, and students, but, yes, keeping track of how things are going. Because we have a history of racism and class bias in this country, which means that all children are not going to be good schools. And we know that there are schools serving low-income kids that disproportionately get teachers who are inexperienced, like Teach for America, or teachers, a revolving door of teachers. or they have larger class sizes, or they don't have labs and are expected to take science courses, and on and on and on. So we have inequities that play out in a lot of ways, and we need to track those. We need to know and expose them and fight against them as part of it. And knowing how well kids are doing in school is part of that story. So what do we mean by alternative assessments? Well, most of you haven't driven. If you don't drive a car, you've been in a car. And if you're in that car driving and you want to see what's going on and keep that car on the road, which do you pay attention to? Do you look in the windshield or do you watch the speedometer the whole time? I don't want to be in the car where they're watching the speedometer the whole time. But that's what a standardized test is. It's like the speedometer. One piece of information that could be useful sometimes, but will not help you get the car down the road safely. You need to look at other items on the dashboard too. More importantly, you've got to look through the windshield and use your rear view mirrors. Right? That's how you're going to stay safe. And don't hit the gas too hard, I suppose. But the thing is, authentic assessment is the effort to gather comprehensive information about how well kids are doing. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how these play out in the real world. One is something called the New York Performance Standards Consortium, performanceassessment.org. These are 28 schools in New York State, likely to expand soon. They have a waiver from all of the state. They're all public high schools. They're not charters, they're public high schools. Most of them are in New York City. They have a waiver from all of the 5 state graduation tests except language arts. They are stuck with that one. But they graduate kids by completing tasks. Now, the tasks are in language arts, math, science, and history. These tasks are created, not the tasks, the scoring and the definition of the tasks are created collaboratively by the teachers across these schools. The actual task is picked by the student. So, for example, in writing the literary analytic paper that you have to do successfully to graduate, what book you read is worked out between you, the student, and the teacher. It's not one book that everybody gets to read together and everybody gets the same formulaic paper. You work that out. But the scoring of all those is done on a common basis so that they can get some uniformity across the schools, for example. And they take some of the sample work and cross-check it by independent readers outside of the school. Now, for each of those 4, you also go before a committee. You have to defend it like you do a doctoral dissertation. You go in and you talk with a committee, one of whom comes from outside the school, one of whom is your teacher, and a third person, and they will ask you questions. And so I've seen tapes of these discussions, for example, in science, where at the end, a scientist from Rockefeller University, one of the leading science research centers in the United States, said, these students understand how to do science better than a lot of my grad students do. They didn't know the content of science, they're high school students, they're not grad students, but they know how to think and reason. What are the results of this program? Now, the schools are demographically virtually identical to New York City in terms of percentage of African American and Latino students, percentage of students with disabilities, percentage of English language learners, percentage of low-income students. They typically come into these schools with lower test scores than average in New York City. What are their graduation rates? Well, their graduation rates are double the city rates for English language learners and for students with disabilities. They're about 10 points higher for African Americans and Latinos. Overall, they're about 10 points higher. They go to college at about 10 percentage point higher rate than they do the city kids on average. They've tracked those kids into college, and being there in the 3rd semester, they are in college at a higher rate than the national average, even though these are low-income kids who tend to go to college with lower resources behind them than the national average. Which is to say, these schools are successful. The turnover rate among the teaching staff, vastly lower. The disciplinary incidents, vastly lower. These are highly successful schools that are organized around serious work that gives students autonomy and self-direction and the ability to be creative, and they're backed and supported by their teachers. They don't just toss them in to do this in their senior year. They are prepared over the years of high school to do this kind of independent, serious work. And lo and behold, they do it, and they are successful, and it's the real-world evidence, i.e. success in college, that proves it, not a test score. As one of the founders of this movement, Deborah Meyer, said, our kids in general, their test scores go up, but not a whole lot. But when they get out of school, they know how to print, They know how to problem solve, they know how to talk, they know how to write, they know how to do research papers, because they had to do 20-page history research paper. They know how to do this stuff when they get to college. These kids are like all the kids in Bedford and Fall River and Boston. You know, they can do this kind of work. So instead of chasing the illusion that is given by jacking up test scores, we need to build school systems rooted in this case, project-based learning and performance assessment, but regardless of the particular approach, because maybe not all schools will be project-based, regardless of the particular approach, to really build systems where kids do serious, in-depth kinds of work. That work can take them out into the communities. There's some excellent schools around the country that are about place-based learning. So kids here could get into the community, explore the community, study the community, critique the community, provide solutions to community problems. Kids are doing that all over the country, and they do that as part of their real work. They learn math, they learn art, they have to write, they have to read, they have to do it in public, they use technology, they study science, they might study the history of it, all of that kind of stuff comes in. Example number 2, something called the Learning Record. LearningRecord.org is the best one. It's basically now not functioning in the United States, but I want to give you the history. It was started in England as a tool for evaluating the progress in reading of inner city London students, most of whom spoke English as a second language. They were, you know, Bengali, Pashtun, I mean, huge numbers of kids came from from South Asia, actually. The idea was to actually get the kids' own work, to have the teachers document the kids' work regularly, observe them, evaluate their work product, to engage in dialogues with parents and students themselves about the learning process, so that at the beginning of the year, every teacher talked to the parent. Tell me about your child as a learner. Not, please come in and bake us some cookies so we can make an extra 25 bucks, which might be nice to do, but who is your child as a learner? Ask the child, who are you as a learner? How do you learn? What interests you? Those kinds of things change the course of thinking and behavior in schools. Over time, this gathering of evidence during the course of the year leads, in the case of reading, to a folder, a portfolio, but a very carefully constructed one which produces serious evidence about the progress the child made as a reader. It was expanded in the United States to go through high school, not just the primary grades. And what we found with this is that they are honest. I sat in on a rescoring where these learning record forms were sent in from multiple sites across the country, and we rescored them. Now, a bunch of the schools were Bureau of Indian Affairs schools. Many of those children had English as a second language. Virtually all of them were low income. They were living on reservations, which, as we know, suffer from high incidence of alcoholism and violence and massive unemployment. And shockingly, these kids were academically well behind the, say, comparable other third graders who came from suburban California. Nobody hid anything. But what the teachers would say is finding out this kind of information about each child as I watch each child as an individual makes me a better teacher. Finding out what other people are doing helps me learn to be a teacher. And so the progress can be charted. Now, again, this is an individual teacher, so how do we weigh up? Do we really trust them? Well, when you look at the data, you can put the kids on developmental reading scales, which in language arts development are commonly known. They have their particular one, they're all fairly similar, because kids have actually been studied and we tend to progress as we learn any given language in certain ways. On average, there's variation. So you can put them on a scale. Is the scale accurate? What about the rescore? And what we find is that a blind rescore was accurate at around the 0.8 rate, which is you and I. That's enormously high. Because you've got kids who are on the cusp between, say, being a 3 and a 4, and it's almost a flip of a coin. And the other thing they found out is that new teachers often did not know how to document the work well. So many have been right about their assessment as to where the kid was, but we couldn't tell from reading the compilation of work. By the second year, they knew what it meant to compile the work. It takes time to learn this stuff. Now, this is a rich literacy tool that helps kids learn to read. They read real books. They don't read formulaic little junk things made to prep kids for standardized tests. If you ever see one, they're frightening. These are real, the kids would read real books. They'd write what they wanted to write about. Nobody made all the kids read the same books. Nobody made them write topics on, paragraphs on all the same topic. The point is that the teachers were able to evaluate with consistency across schools in a way that made them much better teachers, a rich learning environment for the kids, and you could check it from outside as a kind of check on the system to make sure that there weren't teachers who had no idea how to evaluate their kids, or teachers who had extremely low expectations of their kids, and so on, which on occasion happened. So what I'm trying to tell you here is there are ways, without tests whatsoever, of finding out how well kids in general and schools are doing. More importantly, these are tools that are much stronger tools for helping kids learn, for feeding information to parents, for letting next year's teachers know all about, Juanita and Johnny as they go to the next grade. This is much, much more valuable, rich information, and there's no reason this country can't do it. This stuff is done in other countries. We don't need to rely on a test system to know how our schools are doing, and we know for quite clearly now that relying on a test system neither improves schools nor individual learning outcomes. So it's time for a change. And as Saresta said, right now the biggest focus of change is a really exploding opt-out movement, more than 30,000 in New York State, hundreds if not thousands in other states around the country. It's beginning to happen. And there's much else to do. I'm a grandparent. I don't get to decide whether my grandkids opt out of tests. None of them are, I'm sad to say. But it's not my decision. And there are other things that those of us not in a position to opt out can do. We can support the opt-outers. We can speak in favor because the opt-out movement is under attack. We can write letters. We can talk to legislators. We can go to rallies. We can keep the drumbeat up. We can educate our neighbors and our family and friends. There are many, many things we can do in addition to opting out, all of which leads to a fundamental change in the system. Less testing, end the high-stakes testing, and help create the conditions where teachers can build high-quality systems of assessment so that we can actually improve the quality of education all our children get. Thank you.
Let's open it up to questions for the panel. Dialogue. Yes.
I actually have one thing I want to say. I'll try to stay with this too. I think one thing that we should all do is try to educate everyone that we come in contact with. Because I think the problem is a lot of people don't know. They think that what is happening in the schools is good for their children. And teachers are too fearful to tell them that that's not true. So you're in a situation where the teachers have been made to be fearful, and therefore they cannot speak up. Therefore, they don't inform the parents of how insidious this really is for their children. Most of us went to school. We know that school is a personal situation between you and the teacher and your classmates. And now it's not that personal situation at all. It's a situation where the teacher is fearful, the score is everything, the student isn't learning for his own learning. And we get excited learning about things because it's for us. Now they're told this is for the school, this is for the school's score, this is for your teacher's performance, this is in some cases for your teacher's pay. So students are fearful, teachers are fearful, and that's not a good place. Also, all of us went to school and we know we learn best from happy teachers. And now the morale has been destroyed because the teachers are not happy, they're fearful, and they're under pressure, and it's not about them and not about their students, it's about the standardized tests and the scores, numbers, and all the decisions in schools are data-driven, not based on the individual. Creativity is gone, inspiration is gone, innovation is gone, and that leads me to my other point. So this is all an insidious, I hate to use the word plot, because plot is such an alarming word, but it is an insidious plot to make us a non-thinking public, so that we will all just go along with everything and be essentially brainwashed. And two of the forces behind it are Pearson and Bill and Melinda Gates. And this whole insidious project is so that the economic divide will become greater, not lesser. We want to bring the economy so that we are all more equal. Well, that's not what Bill and Melinda want. That's not what Pearson wants. Pearson, in fact, is not an educational company. Pearson is an investment company. And if you go online, you can see the latest slides from their corporate meeting. And for their investors, they are saying that the United States, the whole educational system, because it's such a big country, is just a place to mine money. And they will sell you the curriculum, they will sell you the books, they will sell you the tests, they will sell you the computer software to give the test, and they will score the test. So this is a nationwide project to make some people very, very, very wealthy and leave lots of people behind. The other, Bill and Melinda Gates, they make themselves out as very philanthropic. They're giving grants and money here and there, but it's all for their own benefit and their investors' benefit. They will give away iPads, but then the software is $600 per iPad to put on those iPads so that they will make money. Bill and Melinda Gates send their own children to one of the toniest private schools imaginable, where Bill himself was in Seattle. Their kids are not tested. Why? Because kids at that level of the economic strata are allowed to be creative, allowed to think, allowed to be innovative, allowed to be artists, allowed to have imagination. And imaginative people, innovative people want to make money, want to do things, want to create things, want to be happy. But a depressed public is a very easy public to control. Those of you who went to school when they were actually reading books might have read 1984. And in 1984, you see a very depressed public. You can't question because it's fearful. And what one of our panelists was saying about teachers not being able to tell their students this is not good for them, it's a double thing kind of thing. Most teachers know the pressure on these tests is not good for them, not good for their students, but they are forced to believe that. So it's a double think situation. I know this is bad, but I'm telling the students this is good. So it's an insidious plot to make people poor and not thinkers. It's an insidious plot to make the investors. Pearson is an enormous investment company worldwide. They're global. And in their slides, not only do they show how they want to mine all of this profit from the whole United States federal system. We should not have a federal education system. But they also have a bunch of slides that say global. Once they mine all of this out of the United States, they're going to have a global education system. So my point being that we need to educate all of the people we come in contact with so that they don't believe all of the lies that they're being told. Brainwashed people don't know that they are brainwashed.
Thank you.
Interestingly enough, Pearson doesn't only take money from schools, from students, but also teachers. When they go for their certification, they pay Pearson to be able to be certified. So that's but I have a quick comment. I heard a lot about yellow and special education students. I'm actually, my expertise are in special education. One of the things that really is happening in special education that I think it's going under the carpet, people are not really hearing, is the following. It's true that children who are in special education actually have accommodations for those tests. And they're good accommodations, and they're accommodations that helps them because they have a particular disability. What the interesting thing that has happened is because the teachers know that these tests are not good tests for the students, because the teachers actually have some guilt feelings about doing these tests, and they know that some of the students are not going to pass these tests. Even their best students are going to be challenged by these tests because they see the tests, they read the tests, they proctor the tests. What they do is often prior to the test, they begin referring those certain students to special education, not necessarily because they actually feel the student has a disability, but because they're targeting the accommodations. They're hoping that the student, by being referred, does land on special education, and then those accommodations come, and those students have some relief from those tests. What follows are a bunch of students who are actually your regular average students They end up being tested again for special education with psychologicals, occupational therapy, speech pathology tests, specialist tests, and academic tests. Those tests, again, are tests that are purchased by district for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars that are given by specialized personnel who are paid a lot of money. Now, when these children are tested with those tests, I need to tell you, those tests are highly subjective. I give them? No. You have tests like the KTA, the Kaufman test, which has items that are highly culturally embedded, that English language learners will absolutely fail and get a low score. You have certain items that are also language-based, which English language learners are not able to capture. And you have particular test items. There are, even for white children that are lower income, they cannot actually perform on those tests. So when those scores come lower, the moderate special needs teacher says, yes, there is a disability. And then eventually they get those accommodations. So in actuality, there are a number of students that are actually targeted for special education that shouldn't be, but they are because teachers and administrators are looking for that particular accommodation.
For the test.
For the test, just because of the test. Okay, they're not really interested in the service provision that goes along with special education because they know they don't have the staffing. Because generally schools have very few special education teachers. So they know that for the service provision, there's not going to be enough special educators to service all the kids, but they have the testing accommodations. Okay? That's one area that's highly problematic, and I'm not hearing a lot about, but I'm seeing a lot of kids being targeted for special education that shouldn't be. Another problem that we're having in terms of English language learners, particularly for areas like this, we have a lot of newcomers that when they come in, they're not prepared for the testing. Interestingly enough, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, as I entered the school, a teacher was asked to test 9 kids that came about a month ago. And when the teacher said, but they don't speak English, the principal said, just open the test, have them write the names, and then let them bubble whatever they want. Now, these kids are sitting doing something that they know they don't understand. They're bubbling it anyway, but they really don't know what they're doing. And I often question the violence that goes along with that whole attitude of just let's test them. I'm really interested in seeing, particularly our high school students, enter this debate, where the parents are becoming informed, but so are our younger students. Because as I work with teenagers, I feel that they have a lot to say, but they can't articulate it in the best way to be heard. And I would like us to get to the point that we're actually teaching them how to articulate their voices in a way that they must be heard, rather than acting out, cursing teachers, walking out of class, but actually being able to articulate those voices.
We're working on that. Next fall, we need more youth, for sure. Absolutely. Alex, please, Kate.
I haven't actually heard any of the testimonies. I absolutely support the objectives, and I really hope that either this movement or some other social movement help end high-stakes testing, testing. But meanwhile, teachers are forced to work on a curriculum that is narrowed and helps students pass this, right? And essentially promotes the humanities area, especially what ends up being the most white privilege and at the expense of other voices. And I wonder what strategies you could offer to teachers that will allow them to kind of up this system in their own classrooms, while at the same time being able to teach their laws. Right? Because now this new teacher evaluation system, their jobs are tied to the way
students perform with an understanding of the
There are ways to do it. You know, with the new Common Core curriculum, one of the things that they want you to do is close reading, which is a misnomer in itself by even saying that. They want you to take literature out of context, fiction and nonfiction, take it out of context and just throw it at the students and let them go through it. But what you need is to provide context, but you can be very selective in what you use to provide context for. For example, this year, Russell Brand, I think maybe many of you are familiar with the comedian, actor Russell Brand. He was asked to write an opinion piece in a publication in Britain, and he was ostracized. What do you know about the redistribution of wealth? What do you know about the fact that democracy is compromised? So it turned into where there was a video interview, as well as another piece that he wrote in response to the ridicule that he received. Now, these are perfect learning tools. What you can do is you can supplement and use learning tools that will get the children to start thinking in the ways where they will start questioning. They will start discussion. It will elicit rich discussion, even though you have to teach to the test. You know what the standards are. They've made them fairly clear. Choose the literary pieces that you know will send another message to your children as well. That's one of the ways that I've gotten around it. And when it comes to meeting the standards and the individual benchmarks, you've done it, but you've done it in a way where they start questioning and challenging. And they start waking up to the reality of what they've dealt with. I've also, in the past, used, I don't know if you're familiar with Nikhil Goyal, with all this emphasis on nonfiction text. Nikhil Goyal was in high school last year. He was the graduating class of last year, but he was a high school student that began to question and challenge all of this mess. And he wrote a book. Let's see, what do you call it? One size does not fit all, a student's assessment of school. And he very painstakingly researched the history of education, the research of testing. He interviewed a whole bunch of people that are experts, and he wrote this book. And he wrote this book to show how education now is turning into just a bubble test, and it's creating mindless drone for students. I use that book too, and I also had Nikhil come and present to the students. He actually traveled to Miami and he presented a lecture at FIU. I got FIU to help me make this happen. And these are the things that we can do. If we can't stand up, many of us, I know not everybody's like me, that will just take the risk regardless. But if you don't want to take the risk, you become very selective about materials that you use for your students to get them to meet the objectives for the standards and the benchmarks. But at the same time, it stimulates that creative thinking process, that process to go deeply. And they are very good at being critical of their society if you give them the opportunity and you give them context. You know, this taking things out of context is another way of creating a mind that does not have any schema, anything to latch onto, and nothing stays in the head. Well, provide the context for them. Go against the grain and go back to what we know we used to do. Provide the context for them. And get with your teachers that are in your departments, that are on your grade level. Get with the teachers that are on the grade level before the kids you meet. And start vertical teaming in terms of, well, you make sure they know this, this, and this, and then I'll layer this on. And it's basically going back to old school teaching. But at the same time, under the guise that you're meeting the mandates of the state. So when you develop children's minds, they can pass these tests. Yes, they can. As ridiculous as the tests are, they can. However, with the Common Core assessments, with PARCC and SBA, they're making it very difficult for a lot of children to pass because it's lucrative to create a failure culture. When you really look at it, it's very lucrative. And at the same time, you end up with drones and worker bees, as opposed to those that create and innovate. So there's ways to get around it, and slowly but surely, as I think the teachers start looking at some of the literature, your attitude gets changed as well. I know as I started using literature, I even did simple things like science fiction text when I did bring in, fiction literature. Bring in the science fiction like 1984. Make them draw those parallels to what's going on now. Brave New World, all these things that we used to teach, bring them back. Because this is what will get them thinking. But you can still meet those benchmarks objectives. Now, when it comes to elementary teachers have a special situation they're dealing with because they're forcing young kids to do things that are way beyond some of their even physiological development. And I think you have to protect those children. You have to try your best, but at the same time, I think if you talk to your administrators, I went in front of my school board and I told them straight out, we need some activist administrators here. This is ridiculous. You guys know what's going on with the abuse. You need to start helping those of us that are in the classroom and see the damage. You need to start becoming very vocal. So step by step, your courage gets a little bit greater. Step by step, as you're releasing particular information to people, I think, they begin to want to protect you as opposed to go against you. So it takes courage, yes it does. But you can do it.
I think what's going on in the country is something that teachers have been so battered, with all the attacks. But there's hope because there is a movement around the country. And we need to come together in solidarity and support each other because what this corporate agenda does is pitting each other, teachers against each other. Like the whole concept of, do you want to be in a high-performance school or low-performance school? It's competition right there. Who wants to be, in a low-performance? So my recommendation to you is, there are groups like Seattle teachers. They boycotted, the high school. They boycotted the test, and they have the support of the community. The Chicago strike. There are movement, and I think this is something that I always go around saying, being from Massachusetts, because we're touted all over the country and in the world that we have the best system, but we need to tell the truth. Because I have said to educators and even the governor, how long are you going to go around the country saying that we have the best system, but you always end with the mantra, but we still got a long way to go to close the achievement gap. Hello, it's been how long? And so we have a responsibility to, because that's the other thing that Massachusetts educators have against them, because everybody thinks, that we have the best system, but at the expense of what? Like you're struggling with teaching a curriculum that goes against your brain, against everything that you've been taught. We've been trained to be teachers, and it's an offense to teachers to have Pearson dictating what you're going to do in your classroom. And for our governor and our board of education not to trust that teachers can assess their student, I think that is another offense that we need to, there was an educator in California who said that he blames teachers for not standing up and defending their profession. We need to do that because they would never do that with lawyers and doctors, but we have corporate, Bill Gates telling, our state how we're going to teach our children. And, and this is insane. I posted on my Facebook this thing. You know how sometimes you look in the television ad that says if you took certain drugs, you may be compensated for a class action suit? I posted on my Facebook and someone said we should look into it. Maybe the ACLU can investigate because this is abuse. Our children are being abused. And all those children that were denied a high school diploma and that, end up with no future, many of them, like Judge Ellis has said that since the MCAS has become a high school graduation requirement, he has the number of students that he sees in his court has triple in terms of, and they all have failed the test. So we need to, look at and defend our children, because this is really an abuse that teachers cannot no longer take.
I had two more things I want to say. For those teachers that are fearful, when you start meeting with your community, because nobody can tell you what to do on your own time on Saturday afternoon. When you start meeting with your community members, get the parents to be the vocal face. You can plan behind the scenes, but get the parent to be the vocal face. And the other thing is know your contract. Know your contractual rights. Massachusetts is NEA affiliate, is that what it is? Okay. Okay, district by district, know what your contractual rights are. For example, I can never be held up and fired because of ideas that I embrace that I may not support in terms of policy that comes from the state or the district level. On my own time, I can do all the talking and speaking that I want. I cannot do this inside my school building, and I don't. So know your contractual rights as well, what you can be fired for and what you can't be fired for. But get those parents. They will come. They will come.
And students. There's the Providence Student Union close to here. There are groups in Boston, several student groups organized with an alliance called Young. So there are student organizations. Students across the country a year ago walked out on tests in New York, in Chicago, in Denver, in Portland, Oregon, in support of the teachers. They refused to take the test when the administrators went into the Seattle high schools and the teachers wouldn't give them. The central office sent people in, and then the students refused the tests, backed up by their parents, backed up by the civil rights community. So what we're getting at here is you got to build the allies to make the fight in the school, across the schools, with the parents and with the students, because that's a way to win, and it's probably the only way to win.
I'd like to introduce somebody who just walked in, Robert Lamothe, who's running for the Robert, we are literally, would you like to offer some words on high-stakes standardized testing or educational reform required?
Good evening. I apologize for being late. I had another appointment and then I got lost. Two things actually I was thinking of that I wanted to say if I had a chance to speak. In terms of things that I think we need to be thinking about as we're looking at the issue of high-stakes testing and the Common Core. The first question I think we need to ask ourselves and each other all the time is, what is the purpose of education? High-stakes testing, Common Core are really narrowing our idea of why we have public education. And the fastest way for me to begin to answer that question and help myself have that discussion is to think of the children that we work with, to think of the complexity of their lives, to think of children you love and know, and what you want for them when they go out into the world, and how school is a place that introduces them to hope and creativity and imagination and challenges that they sometimes will fail at and sometimes succeed at. So I think that's a critical question we have to ask ourselves. The other more difficult question is, as citizens of this country, we know that racism, classism, sexism have all been a part of our public schools and continue to be a part of our public institutions. The question about our diversity and how we come to understand ourselves across diversity is a really critical question. That we don't have easy answers to. But the corporate reformers have told us that the answer to our troubled diversity issues and our troubled history is high-stakes testing. That the way we get those teachers to work, those kids to get tests, and then we make sure teachers are accountable to the test. And that is exactly a poison that disrupts the relationships and the complicated relationships that we have to figure out how to negotiate. And then our schools are decided to do that. The public ethnicity, our language, our history together, and the bar. And testing destroys that opportunity. We have this really critical work to do. So I want us to speak back to testing as a pure racism, as a pure classism, and say, no, it's just what I'm educated, and in fact, testing wasn't that. So those are the two parts.
Other questions?
One thing, in response to how political this whole situation is and how activism is so important, you go online and see the speech that Jeb Bush gave recently, and Jeff may or may not ever go for president, and have control over education in Iraq. He was talking about Common Core. He was asked about Common Core at some conference. He was asked about it, and someone mentioned the narrow, writing that's required by the Common Core, and how it's only one kind of writing, and that's argument even for very young children who are not capable of really creating argument in that way, and no more stories, and no more opinion pieces, and no one, writing memoirs or anything. And Jeff said, well, he says, these tests are important, the Common Core is important, because it's never too young to learn that people don't give a shit about what you say, or what you think, or what you feel. That was the example of the judge. I just have a quick question. We heard a lot about the pictures now, what you want on the tests. Where is this needed on this? I don't see this on Fox or something about the
dozens of this. We started, I used to send out like probably 3 photos a day, just to fill lots of photos and most of this and that. And then we used to follow shit around our office and that downloads for this. So I only sent that out just so we sent that out usually. Well, I actually sent that out on compilation to 2 people. I find out something like that. And then some of them are on television, even radio, also, and then we used to put the newspaper all the time. We had some point, but we did it in the time, we didn't include it, because we weren't good at other ones. We didn't want to let you know as much as you knew. And that's not good, because this is not ours. My point is, yeah, you can't count on the media to do any more honest job at education than anything else. My life is, the more I know about something, the more I know the issue is wrong. That's my general experience. And then there's a whole behind it. The advertisers don't know what to say. But this is just awesome. You don't know that kind of stuff happens. You can get hired because of what they're willing to say and what they're willing not to say. All of that. But all the same, we know this stuff does get. In fact, one opt-out gets a news story. I mean, the other side, you find out how it works and who cares. But they love controversy. So they make controversy. That's how they usually come. The other thing to say is that increasingly what we're seeing is at least honest coverage and honest and sympathetic coverage. The attacks on people opting out are not true. They come in the form of opt-outs of editorials like Michelle Reed, first and all that stuff. So she, got her stuff out there and like my really Ford Foundation, was on NPR this morning criticizing the opt-out movement, but there were 2 other people on the program who were defending it. One was opting out, and the other one was like a fair tester, and of course, other people could have had on that show, but they didn't pick 2 people who clearly and explicitly defended the right to opt out, value of opting out, and why they should opt out without all of this stuff. So, okay, then, there's some opting out. I think it's true. We have to work on the media that we can't trust. Relying on big ways, but at the micro level, as we're trying to stuff, the fact is the movement is changing how the media reports on it, and we collectively through our actions force them to be more honest, to be more people know what's really going on, and they won't follow a simple corporate life. Because there aren't any more means is getting more complicated.
One thing that is important that I want to mention is that for example, it's money from so they're very reluctant to publish anything positive about movement. But they love to talk about charts. So we know that. There's a good value from Washington Post. You can get her on the show that's our social education.
Google the answer sheet is a blog the Washington Post maybe not under a firewall or like that. It's still available for you all the time. Again, it's a public treasure. There's one behind the firewall or everything else. There's a lot of things that are not doing. And so, yeah, there are sources out there. You can use blogs. You can go to the this is a long time after the but their blogs are all free. The news is not high. Blog, they're free. And you get some of the really information.
And they got this from Walmart and Bill Gates. So they're going to be lovely. There's also no information on how to make mistakes and rethinking schools. It works every day. So, you could never run out of things to do if you look for them. Rethinking schools and changing mistakes goes very, very good. And you go to Robert and find out how things to read. I think you guys said out there that there's always stuff every day and stuff to read. The other thing is, you talk about students being activists as well as teachers. You probably heard that 530 juniors at Cornell Connecticut High School, 505 walked out on the test. And that was the math test. And the superintendent is considering canceling the ELA because of that. So the strength of non-construction. Also, the Indiana governor just opted out of races to talk so that they can get rid of the whole park on a four-level thing. And the governor can do that. And actually, the little bit of money that we get from races to talk, we're spending on all the tests and all the do without races to talk if your governor just says we don't have to be part of that. And Indiana just did it. And that's an amazing thing for the governor to say, we're not on the floor, we're going to talk about it. When I was president of my teachers association, I refused, even though I was locked in the room with superintendents and school committee people and two principals, to sign the races to talk so our school district does not become like, I mean, now the whole state is, but at least we broke up and they actually locked me in a room with no one else other than the school committee members, the principals, and the superintendent, and I did not. What did you do? Curious about.
I think we challenge ourselves even more. I think about our 5-year-old nephew, and even like seeking out that behavior. When you see, we see it in tests, multiple choice tests. So for my nephew, every single day, walking in the classroom, I take tests. Because how does he tell himself to be quiet? He gets sent to his office all the time. We look back because he can't sit still during unstructured learning time. So every day that I have kids in the classroom, it's a high-stakes test to see whether or not they get to stay. So we talk about this forced out. I mean, we can't just see it as a bubble sheet because the way that our system is structured, you talk about the system prison pipeline, zero tolerance policy. Every time they step into a classroom, it's a high-stakes test. Am I going to get kicked out? And what am I going to ask as a teacher? They're constantly under this pressure and being told that who they are is not really welcome here. Because you cannot say, and this is deep, that we look at the number of kids on drugs for anxiety. Girls, especially, looking at it, girls are on anxiety meds, boys are on like ADHD meds, not that there's not crossover. Look at it, and I see it now in the Bible. It's already
would get to eat. I remember primarily in primary school in Boston Public, and my school is about the, if the test scores still improve, my school will be taken over. So every day, this lovely young principal with lots of energy announces that this is a critically critical week for the kids. It's a K-8 school. The testing, of course, starts grade 3. So they're doing the predictive testing, the Boston Public testing, the MCAS testing, our preliminary assessment. These kids are primarily descendants of Salvador and Colombia, other Central American countries. And the principal, of course, can use the teacher assessment to get rid of teachers who speak up or who have been around too long. He's bringing his own highly selective group, and I'm sure it's happening not just in my Boston school. And those foundations that are supporting this, the Boston Foundation, all of these other, corporate monies are looking for those same people to come in and take over the school. Minorities are being pushed out. All of the older, firsthand I can tell you who has been receiving the poor evaluation. Kids, the teachers that represent the student body. And the kids are in 4th grade, they're still, from starting early in the morning until the end of the day, are not even finished with those tests. They can go on and on. So the humanity and the integrity on a day-to-day basis, it's just going down the drain. We were told how great they did on the predictive test. And he tells us to, kindergarten to 8th grader with a long speaker every day. And the thing is, it's not even true. He's cheerleading, for this improvement and telling the kids this is the most critical week of your life. For the life of the school, not the life of the kids, but they're in 3rd grade. So this is pretty serious. And the stress on everybody, the teachers, the kids, on a day-to-day basis, we're not even talking about their life after they get out of school. This is life now. It's just so sad. It's really totally depressing to leave at the end of the day and see so many sad faces on an ongoing basis. And then the people who kind of suck up to this administration, you just want to, you just can't stand it. And then there's everybody else who, like one of the teachers, one of the kids came in and missed the testing day because he was out sick. So her 3rd grade class came to my arm, and one of the kids was testing across the hall. And when she picked up the kids, he had only been testing for an hour, and even though she was somebody who doesn't agree with the test, she just said, "How can you be done with it?" And we couldn't have been done with that test. That's taking kids hours. But why would they want to sit by himself in a room? Well, his classmates are at our gym. Why would a 3rd grader feel so wanting to do that test with us? So the whole school is just like a lie. And it's just such a miserable place to be, not after they graduate, but on a day-to-day basis. The stress is terrible. So I'm retired. I've had it. Because I teach art, and they'll come and say to my kids when they come to assess me, "How long have you been running on that thing?" Like, why are you asking the kids? Is kids not having working on this thing? Who are you doing this for? Or because you want to get at me? But it's just such a vicious cycle, and I'm glad that some things are happening in some places, but I'm really afraid that Boston Public is huge, and it's pretty severe.
Okay, so really, I'll just say, this is getting cost. strong community and strong camaraderie with all the people that you're working with, and you should work together as a team, because that's the best environment for the kids to work with. And when you create all this competition, it creates all this division, and it just separates everyone, and it creates a miserable environment. And, you know, the kids are going to the PARCC just finished MCAS, and they're so whitewashed and so unhappy, they just walk up the hall, just go like laughing, more things like that, and it's like, for what? Like, I don't understand what this is for, what this is doing. We're supposed to be empowering people and getting this good education. Why are we doing this?
There are so many teachers who I feel this is sad. I mean, these teachers that I remember, but it's not also beautiful. Teaching is a and now it's that's why I'm looking around it. It's insane. And I really, we can't have them in because they're going to need these all should have on, and so I don't know. If you Google, there's a video, and there's their own creation, you should send it to them. This is a video where all students that got together, and they were trying to strategize whether the next out of all is needed. And they decided public communications, and they have lunch, whether they're doing about public communications. I mean, like I said, if you hear some of the things about that, that's something that I'm not going to and I don't know. I always
Yes,
I just wondering if anybody knows public highway rhetoric, sending students that they very acceptance to students who do not have an MCAS diploma. They are, taking the certificates of attainment in public highway. Yeah.
it's very hard in Massachusetts because one of the biggest problems in Massachusetts is connected to financial scholarships. So it's not happening here. Martin doesn't know the situation, but the parent was,
Well, yeah, there was a large opt-out movement in Massachusetts in the period when MCAS first introduced before graduation. So the year before graduation requirement was a new universal walkout to the high school in Indiana. The next year, one student refused. Her parents were well off. She got a doctor, they didn't care, she didn't have a diploma, and her parents took it away. It's not just a state scholarship. You get a federal financial aid, you need a high school diploma, which you don't get in Massachusetts unless you pass the MCAS. Or you can take another state standardized test to prove you're good enough to warrant getting financial aid. This was in part really ironic, this stop the vultures of these fly-by-night colleges, of course, sucking up these financial aid, giving them enough. Kids who really weren't working here. But the good thing that flipped on its head in a way, so it's hard to get, there's almost nobody about targeting without financial aid. Let's face it, so even the middle class. So yeah, it's really, really hard in Massachusetts. I think in Massachusetts high school students, there really has to be another load from protest. But the stakes are not there at the elementary school testing, the middle school testing, with rare exception. And so there, the issue is, it's complicated because in Massachusetts, unlike most states, the law basically says you got to get. See, in most states, the law says that the state has administered that testing. Doesn't say that parents can take tickets. In some states, like California, parents have explicitly acknowledged right law is even law. Now, we're very great that's the law in Massachusetts and in other states, and that's something to look for. But in the meantime, this isn't going to be a hard state to pop out from because of the pressure. So that the Mass School Boards Association, no, it was Texas School Boards Association, because they have the same kind of law. Kids have to take that. Now, kids opt out of Texas, I know some 5th graders, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, we used to take it take a test on the ground. Among other things, but the next thing I law Texas, they did not have to take a test. And there's Texas School Boards Association, and they're fighting against all the testing in the state. They're the ones, 88% of the school boards of Texas passed a resolution over the first sentence that says standardized testing is training and education. 80% of them signed that resolution. From all those, the Tea Party districts, Latino districts down on the border, they all signed. But they put out a thing just today, and it said, well, this is what the state law says, and we're really unhappy about it, but this is what the state law says. So in some states, it's a tougher road than others. We're going to have to use careful strategy beyond calling the other, because people did opt out despite that law a decade, 12 years ago. And I think it's critical to think about how to connect, because if one person is not out, the problem will be if I didn't opt out, we'll go out. If 100 opt out, they have to start. So this isn't the kind of that's all see my mind. What I'm saying is start thinking carefully about how conditions they opt out. And how much of those who opt out are isolated. You know, they've got serious network support and public pressure back on them as part of the opt-out campaign. The point is to really change opting out is, I believe, the most important step that anybody who can take it should take. But not everybody can take it, and it's not the only step that we need to do.
One of the things that I want to say very quickly is that my husband and I, in the event that there will come up some sort of legislation that really would not understand, we consciously decided that we pulled out our festival now back. And, you know, just in case. And I think it's certainly that we would have parents that are willing to do that, know that they have it place. Now, as we begin to train people in various different states, one of the things I'm going to push is to make it harder with private schools that will allow students to come in, because it's not always affordable for everybody. That will work with it, because they don't want to see the permanent areas, definitely. That will work with it, allow students to come in, maybe the last 9 weeks of their senior year, where it's not to be so expensive, and promise to be a child that is qualified, acceptable, keep them engaged to accept whatever they receive, whenever they come to the university. But partnerships like that is important for states like Massachusetts. So that's an option. All these things have to be done, but it's very important that students don't sit in the room, not even in the room where these sessions are being given.
I just wanted to clarify, in terms of what Monty said, that in Massachusetts, the law is only applicable for 10th graders. And so, you know, thinking strategically, you can opt kids out before 10th grade. And if we're looking long term, one of the ways to disrupt the testing cycle is to say, okay, we're going to do it 3rd through 8th, 3rd through 9th. So we don't have to ask for the whole pie right away, but we change the conversation when we start to get huge groups of parents opting their kids out of testing. The other thing I just want to say quickly to you is that I just came from a meeting where I was really depressed. I'm really glad to be here and hear people speaking about the possibilities of change. Because I was at a meeting where people were saying it's inevitable. You know, Common Core's here. If we don't have a park, we're going to have something else. And I think part of what we can really do when we're feeling depressed is your story matters. One of the first levels of organizing is bearing witness. And we need to bear witness to the experiences that we as educators are having, that our children are having. We have to tell the stories, because too many people don't know these stories. We're isolated. So I'm repeating something that someone else said, I apologize, but it really matters. Tell your stories. Write your letters to the paper. Write an op-ed. make something happen that makes the newspaper anxious and worried, and get a story out there. In Northampton, in one of our elementary schools, almost 80% of the kids opted out of the park. Like, that's a big story. It starts to change the conversation. So trust your story and tell your story.
One of the things that we got an email from one of the teachers and parents here in Bedford, how brutal they can be. A kid opted out by a parent to say they put him in the room with the principal, told him that he had to sign the paper and say they finished, which is wrong. Because it means that you took it to the federal automatically, even though I think in Massachusetts if you don't take it, it's federal. But that's giving them the ground for that. Secondly, they put him in the council and basically said, why do you do this? Other kids have to take it, you got to take it too. And that's how nervous they get about this whole thing. When they do this kind of evil and abusive thing. I thought the parents were supposed to be interconnected, I guess. I don't know if she can come around and talk about it. But I think that's a sign that they're beginning to get at people, but they're beginning to attack.
I have to say that in my case, folks were done the medical profession. My kids were into the testing environment. They didn't know the whole better, and they were escorted out, and they were given alternative school. But none of them were professional. Anyway, so that's what we put out there. In fact, I want to talk about my own kids' principles. I have had this scenario where principals themselves have spoken off the record. That's it. Practice basis to exist.
So, you can get the impression that opting out depends on the district you're in. In Worcester, the superintendent said on television that he wants to opt out of MCAS. There's no form on that, just preferences. On the other hand, where I am in Somerville, parents getting very hard with the state of the kid and maybe the test. Even though she is said beforehand, you may not be able to apply for the test. Considering what you do that. So it depends. I would not do it because you think right? I mean, give it a try because there are only. It's also interesting that the Associate Education Commissioner in charge of testing, he was talking about the pilot tests rather than the academic tests. But PARCC's taking a position for the pilot test is part of the same system. So he said, look, our position is you can't opt out. And this was, but among reasonable adults, if a kid comes in and says, my mom doesn't want to take the test, I'm not going to sit down and say, must. However, perhaps. But one more thing I would say, though, is if you decide I'll get out the test, so if you want to make a difference, after your kid doesn't take the test, so write out the paper and say you did that, right? Don't do it in private, because that's not nice for your kid, but it's going to make a difference to be actually made.
Not only that, that's really important in like university because it's the same thing. You got districts where we're going to make you take the test, you'll sit there all for 3 hours. You don't know what that's done. Versus others where, we have all different possibilities. So both of those people are hot. But the other thing to remember is, they can talk about, if you're not allowed, they're on no penalties. It's not like a traffic fine or anything like that. They're not.
Yes, I have a practical suggestion. Is maybe we can have available to parents, anybody who wants some sample letters to send in principals and have it say, please, I would like my child not to take the test and have a signature so that maybe do it in several different languages, have it available on the website, the website, maybe this is the public school's website, on the website, and start also passing them out. This is a sample letter. We're asking parents to opt out, and I think it's a great idea about limiting it to the elementary school, where there's more higher consequences in high school, but we can really build a movement in elementary schools. And I've taught for 18 years, and I can tell you, as many people are saying, that the stress, that the effect that it has on children, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way up, is enormous. But the other thing that we don't necessarily associate is the cost of that testing is at the expense of the creativity. People have mentioned that. Is the ability of teachers and students to be creative teaching, and also the cost that it has in doing something to that joy of learning. And the joy of learning that children have is dissipating and being beat down because they've been told how important and cheerleading for the tests are. So I see it, what's happened to children, that excitement in early grades. I've taught also in high school, and something happens between those early grades, by the time they hit freshman year in high school, the spirit, the joy, often has been beat down. And that's the expense of what the testing is. That joy of learning is being beat down. We've got to remember that and bring that back. And my advice to parents too is parents look at schools and they pick at schools sometimes when they think of schools. They look at this as test scores. And also they hear the cheerleading from the administrators. Oh, you're doing great on the test. We're such a ranking. Well, I would run from that school. Go find any school that's not cheerleading for the test. Look for another school that values creativity and the joy of learning. That's what you're looking for in school.
Those letters actually exist.
Well, they do.
Yeah, but keep in mind that our webpage is down. But you can come around and have access to it. Just go to Facebook.
We should pass these up. Make up thousands, hundreds of these, and pass them out to all the parents at school.
The other thing that I should have mentioned for many others here, Alan and maybe I all were citizens of public schools, which are already mentioned, but we're all on board, go citizens of public schools in Massachusetts. For example, there is now a week, what's important, what's happening, it addresses testing, and it addresses privatization, in particular, among K-12 other issues. Every week, and there's quarterly newsletters, there's some more in-depth stories. We'll make sure that the outside letter, our citizens become. It's a good, you should become a member, you should certainly sign on and make sure that you get the weekly news update, because there's a lot of stuff going on. So that, for example, we might find out that there's this growing number of school meetings that have passed resolutions saying, as far as we're concerned, students have the right to opt out of podcasts. So it's about 8 or 9, growing, not fast, but growing. And so that kind of information is right.
We have a lead that tells us that we're outside the box, so I appreciate everyone.